Alex couldn't believe his luck when he found the perfect house in Pinecrest Estates. With tree-lined streets and well-kept lawns, it seemed like the ideal place to start fresh after his promotion. The moving trucks had barely left when a sharp knock interrupted his unpacking. "Welcome to the neighborhood. I'm Diane Miller, HOA president," said a woman with perfectly styled hair and a clipboard clutched to her chest. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes as she handed Alex a thick binder. "Our community guidelines, I suggest you read them thoroughly." Before Alex could properly introduce himself, Diane was pointing at his moving boxes on the driveway. "Those need to be out of sight by sundown. Section 3, Paragraph 2 of the guidelines clearly states no clutter visible from the street." Alex nodded politely. "Of course, I'll take care of it right away." As Diane walked away, his next-door neighbor Tom leaned over the fence. "I see you've met the dragon lady," he whispered. "Watch yourself. She's made grown men cry over the wrong shade of beige paint." Alex laughed it off. How bad could it be? He was good at getting along with people, and he always followed rules. Besides, HOAs protected property values, which was why he'd chosen a neighborhood with one. The first week passed quietly. Alex focused on settling in and starting his new job. His 10-year-old son Jake was excited about the big backyard, perfect for playing catch and basketball. "Dad, can we put up a hoop?" Jake asked, bouncing his basketball in the driveway. "Bobby from school has one, and it's awesome." "Sure thing, buddy. We'll get one this weekend." That Sunday, Alex installed a basketball hoop on the garage. It was removable and neat-looking, nothing that could possibly bother anyone. Jake spent the afternoon practicing shots, his laughter filling the air. The next morning, Alex found a violation notice taped to his front door. "Unapproved sporting equipment installation. Fine, $100. Remove immediately." Confused, Alex checked the HOA guidelines. Basketball hoops required committee approval, which met monthly. He sighed and took down the hoop, explaining to a disappointed Jake that they'd just need to wait a little longer. That afternoon, Alex visited Diane to apologize and submit the proper paperwork. "I'm really sorry about the mix-up," he said, handing her the completed form. "I should have checked the rules more carefully." Diane's house was immaculate, with not a flower out of place in her garden. Inside, framed photos showed her standing with important-looking people at community events. "This is exactly why we have guidelines," she said, not accepting his apology. "People move in thinking they can do whatever they want. That's not how Pinecrest works. The committee will review your application next month, but I should warn you, sporting equipment is rarely approved in front yards." As days passed, Alex noticed Diane driving by his house several times daily, slowing down to inspect his property. When he waved, she'd write something on her clipboard without acknowledging him. More violation notices appeared. Grass half an inch too tall, trash bins visible from the street 2 hours after collection, unapproved welcome mat color. Each came with fines that seemed excessive for such minor issues. Other neighbors started warning Alex. "She's got it out for you," said Linda from across the street. "Diane does this to newcomers she thinks might challenge her authority. My advice? Keep your head down and follow every rule to the letter." But even perfect compliance didn't help. When Alex planted flowers from the approved plant list, Diane claimed they were arranged in an unapproved pattern. When he painted his mailbox the exact shade specified in the guidelines, she issued a violation claiming improper application technique. One evening, while Alex was grilling in his backyard, well within allowed hours, Diane appeared at his fence. "Your smoke is drifting into my yard," she snapped. "And that grill isn't the approved model." Alex felt his patience wearing thin but kept his voice calm. "The guidelines don't specify grill models, Diane. I checked carefully." "Well, they should," she huffed. "I'll be bringing that up at the next board meeting." As she walked away, Alex realized this wasn't about rules at all. This was about power, and somehow, he'd become Diane's new target. The situation with Diane grew worse with each passing day. Alex tried everything to keep peace in the neighborhood, but nothing seemed to work. He'd wake up early to check his property before leaving for work, making sure nothing could possibly violate the HOA rules. Still, the violation notices kept coming. When Alex walked his dog in the evening, he'd noticed Diane's curtains move slightly, watching his every move. Other neighbors would give him sympathetic looks or quick warnings when they saw her approaching. "Watch out, she's on the warpath today," whispered Tom one afternoon when Alex was retrieving his mail. "She's already issued 3 violations on Maple Street this morning." Alex had applied for proper permission for the basketball hoop weeks ago, but the HOA committee, which Diane controlled completely, had denied his request. Jake was heartbroken. "But why, Dad? Bobby has one." "So does Tyler and Chris," Jake asked, kicking at the grass. "Some people just like saying no, buddy," Alex replied, trying to hide his frustration. "We'll figure something out." The next week, Alex attended an HOA meeting, hoping to appeal the decision. The community center was filled, with neighbors, most looking tired and resigned as Diane stood at the front with her slideshow of neighborhood violations. "This is what happens when we let standards slip," she said, clicking through photos of minor infractions. A trash can left out too long, a garden hose not properly stored, a bicycle left on a front porch. With a smug smile, she included 3 separate photos of Alex's property. When Alex raised his hand to speak about the basketball hoop, Diane cut him off. "We've already voted on that matter. Next item." After the meeting, several neighbors approached Alex. "Don't take it personally," said an older woman named Ruth. "She's been this way for 15 years. Last month, she made Harold tear down his handicap ramp because it wasn't the right shade of brown." "How does she get away with this?" Alex asked. "Fear," said Tom, who had joined them. "She knows everyone's secrets, and she's friends with half the town council." The real trouble started when Alex decided to plant a vegetable garden in his backyard. He carefully reviewed the HOA guidelines. Nothing prohibited gardens as long as they weren't visible from the street. He spent a weekend building raised beds and planting tomatoes, peppers, and herbs. 3 days later, he came home to find Diane standing in his backyard taking photos. "Excuse me," Alex said, struggling to keep his voice level. "This is private property. Agricultural activities are prohibited," Diane said, not looking up from her camera. Section 8, paragraph 12. "That's not true," Alex replied. "I've read the guidelines cover to cover. Gardens are allowed in backyards. The board voted on an amendment last night," she said with a thin smile. "No notification period required for health and safety concerns. These plants could attract rodents." That evening, Alex installed security cameras around his property, allowed under the guidelines, for personal safety. The next morning he found his garden destroyed, plants uprooted and scattered across the lawn. The security footage showed Diane entering his yard at 3 a.m., methodically destroying everything he'd planted. When Alex took the footage to the local police, they seemed reluctant to get involved. "It's a civil matter," the officer said with a shrug. "HOA disputes aren't our jurisdiction." But Alex wasn't giving up. He filed a report anyway and sent copies of the footage to every HOA board member. 3 days later, he received a notice that Diane had filed a complaint against his security cameras, calling them invasive surveillance devices. The final straw came when Alex got approval to install a small storage shed in his backyard. The delivery truck arrived on a Saturday morning, and Alex was signing the paperwork when a car screeched into his driveway, blocking the truck. Diane stepped out, waving a piece of paper. "Delivery hours are between 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. on weekdays only." "It's 10:30 a.m., Alex pointed out. "And the guidelines say weekend deliveries are acceptable with 24-hour notice, which I provided." "To the wrong email address," she snapped. "This delivery is unauthorized." As neighbors gathered to watch the confrontation, Alex felt his face burning with embarrassment. The delivery driver awkwardly suggested he could come back another time. "No," Alex said firmly. "I followed every rule. The shed stays." Diane's face turned red with anger. "You'll regret this," she hissed before storming back to her car. "Nobody challenges me in my neighborhood." As she drove away, Alex didn't realize just how serious her threat would turn out to be. Alex was in the middle of an important meeting when his phone wouldn't stop buzzing. 3 missed calls from his neighbor Tom, followed by a text that made his blood run cold. "Come home now. Emergency." Heart pounding, Alex rushed out of the office, his mind racing with terrible possibilities. Had something happened to Jake at school? Was there a break-in? Nothing prepared him for what he saw as he turned onto his street. 3 fire trucks were parked in front of his house, their lights flashing against the afternoon sky. Neighbors stood in small groups, watching as firefighters moved around his property. Alex slammed on the brakes and jumped out of his car. "What happened? Is everyone okay?" Tom rushed over. "Jake's fine. He's still at school. It's your garage, Alex." Alex stared in horror. Where his detached garage had stood that morning, there was now only a charred skeleton of wood and metal. The smell of smoke hung thick in the air as firefighters doused the remaining hot spots. "It went up so fast," an elderly neighbor said, shaking her head. "Never seen anything like it?" A firefighter approached, his face grim beneath his helmet. "Sir, are you the homeowner?" Alex nodded, still in shock. "I'm sorry about your garage. We contained it before it spread to the house, but the structure is a total loss. Any idea what you were storing in there? What wasn't he storing there?" Alex's mind raced through the inventory. His father's vintage Mustang he'd spent 3 years restoring. Boxes of family photos he hadn't yet unpacked, all his tools, Jake's bike. "Was it electrical?" Alex asked, his voice barely a whisper. "We'll investigate." But something accelerated this fire. It burned too hot, too fast. As if on cue, Alex spotted Diane standing across the street, watching the scene with an expression that wasn't quite concern. Their eyes met and she quickly looked away. Later that evening, after the firefighters left and Jake was safely at a friend's house, Alex sat on his front steps, staring at the blackened remains. Tom brought over a beer and sat beside him in silence. "I should check the security footage," Alex said suddenly, remembering the cameras he'd installed. Inside, Alex downloaded the day's recordings. What he saw made him sick to his stomach. At 10:17 that morning, barely 20 minutes after he'd left for work, Diane had walked along the side of his house, looking around nervously. In her hand was a red gas can. The footage showed her disappearing behind the garage, out of the camera's view. 15 minutes later, she reappeared without the can, walking quickly back toward her house. The fire hadn't started immediately. The timestamp showed the first smoke at 11:32, over an hour later. Alex called the police immediately. 2 officers arrived, viewed the footage, and took statements from neighbors who confirmed seeing Diane near Alex's property that morning. By midnight, Diane was being led out of her house in handcuffs, her face a mask of indignation as neighbors watched from their windows and doorways. "This is ridiculous," she shouted. "Do you know who I am? My brother-in-law is Judge Wilson." Alex felt no satisfaction watching her being placed in the police car, just emptiness. His garage was still gone. His car was destroyed. The box containing the only photos of his late wife was now ashes. The next morning, the newspaper ran the story. HOA president arrested for arson. Alex couldn't bring himself to read it. He was too busy calling his insurance company and trying to explain to Jake why someone would deliberately burn down their garage. "But why would she do that, Dad?" Jake asked, his eyes wide with confusion. "Some people can't stand not getting their way," Alex replied, struggling to find words a 10-year-old could understand. 3 days later, Alex was raking through the debris, seeing if anything could be salvaged, when a black SUV pulled up. A well-dressed man stepped out, Diane's attorney. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm Howard Klein. I represent Mrs. Miller." Alex straightened up, ash covering his clothes. "What could you possibly have to say to me? Mrs. Miller has been released on bail. She wanted me to convey that this unfortunate incident has been blown out of proportion. She's willing to drop her complaints against you with the HOA if you'll consider withdrawing your statement to the police." Alex stared at the man in disbelief. "She burned down my garage." "Allegedly," the lawyer said smoothly. "And between us, with her connections, this case will likely be reduced to a misdemeanor, property dispute." As if to prove his point, Diane drove by at that exact moment, slowing to give Alex a smug smile through her car window. Something shifted in Alex that afternoon. He'd tried playing nice. He'd tried following rules. He'd even tried legal channels. But as he watched Diane's car disappear down the street, he realized this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. "Tell your client I'm not dropping anything," Alex said to the lawyer, "and tell her to enjoy her freedom while it lasts." That night, Alex made a phone call to an old college friend who worked in finance. "Hey Mike, remember how you always said you owed me a favor? I need to know everything about property debt acquisition." Alex knew that fighting Diane head-on would be useless. Her connections ran deep in the community, and the smug look on her face told him she truly believed she was untouchable. But Alex hadn't become successful in his career by giving up when things got tough. He needed to be smarter than her. He needed a plan. The call with his college friend Mike lasted nearly 2 hours. By the end, Alex had a notepad full of information that made him see Diane in a completely different light. "So you're telling me she's actually broke?" Alex asked, finding it hard to believe. "On paper, she looks wealthy," Mike explained over the phone. "Nice house, fancy car, designer clothes. But financially, she's hanging by a thread. The recession hit her husband's business hard. They've been taking out loans against their property for years. And with the lawsuit from that contractor, she refused to pay. They're practically underwater." Alex tapped his pen against the notepad. "So how does this help me?" "You want justice, right? The legal system might fail you, but money never lies. From what I can see, Diane owns not just her house, but 2 rental properties in your neighborhood, all heavily mortgaged through Coastal Bank. 3 missed payments on any of them, and the bank can foreclose." Alex thought about this. "But wouldn't the bank just sell to someone else?" Mike chuckled. "Not if you're first in line. Look, I've got a buddy at Coastal who can give us a heads up when things start moving. In the meantime, we set up an LLC to hide your identity. Make it look like an investment group. We can even start buying pieces of her debt from the bank." "Is that legal?" Alex asked. "Completely. Banks sell debt all the time. They'd rather get something than nothing. The beautiful part? She'll never see it coming." Over the next few weeks, Alex went about his life normally. He rebuilt his garage, went to work, and took Jake to baseball practice. If neighbors mentioned Diane's upcoming trial, he simply nodded and changed the subject. On the surface, he appeared to have moved on. Behind the scenes, though, Alex was working tirelessly. He formed Pinecrest Investments LLC with Mike's help, making sure his name appeared nowhere in the paperwork. Then, through Mike's contact at the bank, he began purchasing the debt on Diane's properties at a discount. "She's missed 2 mortgage payments already," Mike reported one evening. "The legal fees from her case are draining them dry. And get this, she's been using HOA funds to pay her attorney. The board doesn't know yet." Alex wasn't surprised. Diane's arrogance had always been her blind spot. She was so focused on maintaining her image and fighting the arson charge that she couldn't see the financial quicksand beneath her feet. The opportunity came faster than Alex expected. A small foreclosed property next to Diane's house went up for auction. Alex's LLC was the highest bidder. 2 weeks later, another property on her street became available when the owners moved away, suddenly. Again, Alex's company bought it. "What are you going to do with these houses?" Tom asked when he noticed the same under new management signs appearing. "Just investing in the neighborhood," Alex replied with a smile. "I believe in Pinecrest's future." Meanwhile, Diane's arson case was moving slowly through the courts. Her brother-in-law, the judge, had recused himself due to conflict of interest, but she'd managed to delay the trial with various legal maneuvers. Each delay cost her more money she didn't have. One day, Alex received a call from Mike. "It's happening. She missed her 3rd payment on all 3 properties. Coastal is starting foreclosure proceedings next week." Alex took a deep breath. "And we're positioned to buy the debt?" "Better. We already own most of it. When Coastal forecloses, your LLC has first rights. You'll essentially own everything she has." 2 days later, Alex was working in his yard when Diane drove by, slowing down to glare at him. The stress of the legal battle had taken its toll. Her normally perfect hair was unkempt and dark circles shadowed her eyes. Still, that same smug expression remained. Little did she know that while she'd been focused on making Alex's life miserable, he'd been quietly building a trap she couldn't escape. He gave her a friendly wave as she drove past, knowing that very soon, the tables would turn completely. That evening, Alex sat on his porch watching the sunset and thinking about how strange life could be. 6 months ago, he'd moved here hoping for a peaceful new start. Instead, he'd found himself in a war with a neighborhood tyrant, a war he was now poised to win, not through confrontation but through careful planning. The day of Diane's court hearing arrived with little fanfare. Alex decided to attend, not out of spite but to see justice served. The courtroom was nearly empty, just a few curious neighbors, the prosecutor, and Diane with her expensive attorney. Alex sat quietly in the back row, watching as Diane strutted in wearing designer clothes and flashing a confident smile at the judge. Despite the security footage and witness statements, her attorney had worked miracles. Through legal maneuvering and calling in favors, he'd managed to get the charges reduced from felony arson to criminal mischief and trespassing. In light of Mrs. Miller's previously clean record and standing in the community, the judge announced, the court sentences her to 2 years probation, community, service, and restitution for the damaged property. Diane turned and gave Alex a triumphant smirk. She'd gotten away with burning down his garage, destroying irreplaceable family treasures, and would barely face consequences. The restitution would be a fraction of what was lost, and her insurance would likely cover most of it. The system works. For people like me, she whispered as she passed his seat on her way out. Alex said nothing. He simply checked his watch and headed to work. There was no point confronting her now. The real reckoning was already in motion. The very next morning, Diane's world began to crumble. As she stepped outside to collect her newspaper, she found an official-looking envelope taped to her door. Inside was a notice of foreclosure from Coastal Bank, stating that due to 3 months of missed payments, the bank was exercising its right to take possession of her property. Similar notices appeared on her 2 rental properties across the neighborhood. Diane spent the day in a panic, making frantic calls to the bank, but the customer service representatives had no answers for her. Her account had been sold to a private investment firm. If she wanted to stop the foreclosure, she'd need to pay the full amount owing within 30 days. Nearly $850,000 across all 3 properties. Diane rushed to her financial advisor, who delivered more bad news. Her credit had been destroyed by the criminal case. No bank would offer refinancing with a recent conviction, even a reduced one, and the investment account she thought would save her, nearly empty after paying legal fees. There must be something we can do, she insisted, her usual commanding tone now tinged with desperation. We've lived in that house for 20 years. You should have thought about that before missing payments, her advisor replied, tired of Diane's demanding attitude. Or before spending your emergency fund on that luxury cruise last year. At home, Diane found her husband Bill packing his office belongings. His business partner had called. Their company was being audited for financial irregularities. Someone had reported suspicious transactions to the IRS. They're looking at the books right now, Bill said, his face ashen. We could lose everything. We already are, Diane replied, showing him the foreclosure notice. As word spread through the neighborhood, Diane maintained her facade of control. At the HOA meeting that evening, she acted as if nothing was wrong, harshly criticizing a family's holiday decorations and proposing stricter rules for lawn care. Alex attended the meeting, but remained silent, watching as Diane desperately clung to the one thing she still had, power over the neighborhood. Little did she know that too was about to change. The following week, notices appeared throughout Pinecrest Estates announcing a special HOA meeting. The topic: Introduction of new majority property owner and board election. When Diane saw the notice, she immediately called an emergency board meeting at her house. This is ridiculous. Who is this new owner? And why wasn't I informed? She demanded of the other board members. The investment company has been buying properties for months, explained Doug. the HOA treasurer. They now own 9 houses in the neighborhood, including the 3 foreclosures. What 3 foreclosures? Another board member asked. Diane's face flushed. She hadn't told anyone about her financial troubles. Just some properties that couldn't keep up with their mortgages, she said dismissively. The point is, we need to block this takeover. I've run this board for 15 years. The night of the special meeting arrived. The community center was packed. Everyone wanted to see what was happening. Diane arrived early, positioning herself at the front, ready to challenge this mysterious investor. At exactly 7 p.m., the back door opened and Alex walked in, carrying a briefcase. The room fell silent as he made his way to the podium. Good evening, everyone, he said calmly. I'm here tonight as the representative of Pinecrest Investments, LLC. Diane's jaw dropped. You? That's impossible. Alex opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. Not impossible, Diane, just business. Pinecrest Investments now owns 12 properties in this neighborhood, including yours. He handed copies of the paperwork to the board members. As the new majority property owner, I'm calling for a board election tonight as allowed by the HOA bylaws you so frequently quote. The color drained from Diane's face as she realized what had happened. While she'd been focused on her court case and maintaining her image, Alex had quietly been buying up properties around her. And now he controlled her fate. You can't do this, she whispered, but her voice lacked its usual authority. Actually, I can, Alex replied, not unkindly. And the first order of business will be reviewing those foreclosure notices that went out last week. As the reality of her situation sank in, Diane slumped in her chair, watching as 15 years of neighborhood control slipped through her fingers. The same neighbors who had feared her for years now avoided her gaze, some barely hiding their satisfaction at seeing the tables turned. The vote was quick and unanimous. Alex was elected the new HOA president, with Tom as vice president and Ruth as treasurer. Diane wasn't even nominated for a position. As the meeting adjourned, Diane sat alone, staring at the foreclosure notice she'd brought with her, hoping to somehow fight it. Now she understood it was hopeless. The neighborhood tyrant had finally met her match, not through confrontation but through the very system she'd used to control others. The morning after the HOA meeting, Alex's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Neighbors he barely knew called to congratulate him and share stories about Diane's years of tyranny. Some offered to help with his plans for the neighborhood. Others simply wanted to thank him for ending her reign. Alex hadn't expected to become a community hero. He'd only wanted justice for himself. But as he listened to story after story, elderly residents forced to pay thousands for minor violations, families driven away by harassment, a veteran who couldn't fly an American flag without Diane citing him, he realized this was about more than personal revenge. You have no idea what you've done for us, said Ruth, dropping by with a homemade apple pie. That woman made our lives miserable for years, but nobody knew how to stop her. Meanwhile, across the street, Diane and Bill were in crisis mode. They'd consulted 3 different attorneys, all of whom delivered the same news. The foreclosure was legal. Pinecrest Investments LLC had legally purchased their debt, and after multiple missed payments had every right to take possession of their properties. There has to be a way out, Diane insisted, pacing their living room while Bill sat with his head in his hands. My father built this house. We raised our children here. Maybe we should talk to Alex, Bill suggested. Try to work something out. Diane's face hardened. Never. He did this to humiliate me. I won't give him the satisfaction. He did this? Because you burned down his garage, Bill snapped, finally losing patience with his wife. You destroyed his family photos, his father's car. For what? Because he put up a basketball hoop? Because he challenged you at a meeting? Look where your pride has gotten us. The argument that followed was so loud that neighbors could hear it from the street. By evening, Diane had locked herself in their bedroom, refusing to speak to anyone, while Bill sat on the front porch with a glass of whiskey, nodding sadly at passing neighbors. The next day, a formal eviction notice appeared on Diane's door. 30 days to vacate the premises. Similar notices appeared on her rental properties, forcing her tenants to scramble for new housing. The community buzzed with the news. Some felt Alex had gone too far, affecting innocent renters. Others believed it was long overdue karma. Alex heard these whispers and called an emergency HOA meeting. "I understand there's concern about the tenants in Diane's rental properties," he addressed the packed room. "I want to assure everyone that Pinecrest Investments has offered all current tenants the option to stay with no rent increase for 6 months. We're also covering moving expenses for anyone who chooses to leave." Relief washed over the crowd. This wasn't about punishing everyone, just holding one person accountable. After the meeting, Bill approached Alex in the parking lot. "I wanted to apologize," he said, looking much older than he had just weeks before. "What Diane did was inexcusable. I didn't know how far she'd gone until it was too late." Alex nodded, seeing the genuine regret in the man's eyes. "It wasn't your fault. We've been married 37 years, Bill continued. "She wasn't always like this. Something changed when we moved here. The power went to her head, and I never stood up to her." He hesitated. "Is there any way, any arrangement we could make? We literally have nowhere to go." Alex had prepared for this moment. "I can't stop the foreclosure." 6 months after Diane's departure, Pinecrest Estates had transformed into the friendly community Alex had originally hoped for. The neighborhood's annual spring festival was in full swing, with families gathered in the park that had once been restricted to quiet activities only under Diane's rules. Children played tag across freshly cut grass while parents chatted by picnic tables loaded with potluck dishes. Alex flipped burgers at the grill, occasionally glancing at the empty lot where Diane's house had once stood. After taking ownership, he'd made a surprising decision. Instead of selling or renting the property, he'd had the house demolished. "You sure about this?" Tom had asked when the bulldozers arrived. "That house could bring good money." "Some things are worth more than money," Alex had replied. Now, as neighbors enjoyed the festival, that empty lot stood transformed. Construction crews had spent weeks building a small pavilion, installing benches and planting flower gardens. A simple stone marker near the entrance read, "Pinecrest Community Space where neighbors become friends." Jake ran up to Alex, his face flushed with excitement. "Dad, can I show Carl and Pete the basketball court?" Alex nodded, smiling as his son led a group of boys toward the newly installed court at the edge of the community space. The sound of bouncing basketballs and children's laughter filled the air, sounds that would have earned violation notices just months ago. Ruth approached the grill carrying a pitcher of lemonade. "Need a drink? You've been cooking for hours." "Thanks," Alex said, accepting a glass. "Hard to believe how much things have changed around here. For the better," Ruth replied. "Did you hear Bill's back in town? He's staying with his daughter in the next county. Looks 10 years younger without Diane around." Alex nodded, having heard the news. After moving into the guest house, Bill had eventually relocated to be near family, finding work at a local hardware store and slowly rebuilding his life. "And Diane?" Alex asked, though he already knew the answer. Ruth lowered her voice. "Living in that tiny apartment complex near the highway, works at the mall now, customer service desk. Apparently, she's already had 3 complaints about her attitude." Alex couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy. Diane had created her own downfall, but he took no joy in her struggles. As afternoon turned to evening, neighbors gathered around picnic tables, sharing stories and plans for the community. The atmosphere was relaxed, no one checking watches, to make sure gatherings ended by the previously mandated 8 p.m. noise curfew. "I've been thinking," Alex announced as conversations quieted, "about what to do with Diane's rental properties. Pinecrest Investments still owns them, but they need more than just new tenants." The neighbors listened attentively as Alex outlined his vision. One property would become affordable housing for seniors, with reduced rent for longtime community members who could no longer maintain larger homes. The other would be converted into a small business space, perhaps a coffee shop or bookstore, where neighbors could gather year-round. "That's going to cost a fortune," someone pointed out. "Worth every penny," Alex replied. "This isn't about money, it's about building the community we all want to live in. Doug, the former HOA treasurer, stood up with his glass raised. To Alex, who saved us from the dragon lady and showed us what a real community leader looks like. Cheers erupted around the tables, making Alex uncomfortable with the attention. He hadn't set out to be a hero or a leader. He'd simply wanted justice for himself and his son. Everything else had followed naturally. As darkness fell, someone started a small bonfire in the designated fire pit. Another new addition that would have been strictly forbidden under the old regime. Neighbors roasted marshmallows while others set up lawn chairs to watch the stars appear. Jake sat beside Alex, sticky marshmallow residue on his fingers. Dad, remember when you said we couldn't put up our basketball hoop because of the mean lady's rules? Alex nodded, remembering those early days of frustration. I'm glad she burned our garage, Jake said simply. What? Why would you say that? Jake shrugged. Because if she didn't, you wouldn't have bought her house, and we wouldn't have this cool park, and I wouldn't have friends like Carl and Pete, and we wouldn't be having this awesome party. Alex stared at his son, amazed at the wisdom in those words. From the worst event of their time in Pinecrest had come something unexpectedly wonderful. Later that night, as the festival wound down and neighbors began heading home, Alex took a moment alone by the bonfire. He thought about the strange journey that had brought him here, from new homeowner to victim, from victim to strategist, from strategist to community leader. Tom joined him, handing Alex another drink. Penny for your thoughts? Just thinking about how sometimes the worst things lead to the best outcomes, Alex replied. When she burned my garage, I wanted revenge. I wanted her to feel what I felt, to lose something precious. But somewhere, along the way, it stopped being about revenge. Became about justice, Tom nodded. And not just for you, for all of us. Alex looked around at the neighborhood, at the new basketball court where children played, at the community garden where Ruth was teaching younger residents about vegetables, at the freshly painted homes no longer restricted to 6 approved colors. I got a letter from her attorney last week, Alex admitted. She wants to buy back her house, offered twice what it's worth. What did you say? I told him the property isn't for sale at any price. Some things mean more than money. As they watched the last embers of the bonfire glow orange against the night sky, Alex realized he had found something he hadn't expected when moving to Pinecrest. Not just a house, but a real home, and not just neighbors, but a community. 3. Days later, Alex was working in the community garden when a familiar car drove slowly past. Diane sat behind the wheel, looking thinner and older than he remembered. She stopped briefly, staring at the pavilion and gardens that had replaced her pristine home. Their eyes met across the distance. For a moment, neither moved. Then, surprising them both, Alex raised his hand in a small wave. Not friendly, exactly, but acknowledging the strange connection they would always share. Diane didn't wave back. She simply drove away, disappearing around the corner and out of Pinecrest Estates for what most neighbors hoped would be the final time. As Alex returned to his gardening, he reflected on the lessons of the past year. Sometimes justice came through unexpected channels. Sometimes losing everything material opened the door to gaining something more valuable. And sometimes, the best revenge wasn't getting even, but creating something better than what had been destroyed. The basketball court echoed with the sound of children playing, a